Paul, the boss at this fancy restaurant, made fun of a poor kid named Jaden just because he's black. But in a mere 3 hours, Paul would rue the day. Jaden strolled down the street on that sultry late summer afternoon, his stomach growling with hunger and the relentless sun beating down on him. He had been wandering the streets for hours, seeking charity, but it seemed luck was not on his side that day. Just as Jaden was on the brink of despair, he spotted a grand restaurant across the street. The place was bustling with activity, and Jaden watched eagerly as well-dressed patrons entered and exited. A glimmer of hope sparked within Jaden. Surely he could garner some generosity from the affluent diners inside. Perhaps the restaurant manager might even take pity on him and offer a job in exchange for a meal or some money, Jaden mused optimistically. With newfound determination, Jaden navigated through the bustling traffic and eagerly made his way towards the restaurant. But as he stood before the grandiose building, it hit Jaden like a ton of bricks. He didn't belong there. This restaurant was clearly reserved for the elite, not for someone like him, scraping by on the streets. Yet his rumbling stomach refused to be ignored, fueling his determination. Jaden wasn't about to turn tail now, not after coming this far. Steeling himself, he yanked open the polished glass door and strode into the establishment. Inside, Jaden hesitated, feeling out of place amidst the luxurious decor. He hadn't taken more than a few steps before a large, imposing figure materialized before him. Hands on hips, the man regarded Jaden with undisguised contempt. "What's a scrawny black beggar like you doing in my joint?" Paul spat at Jaden. If Jaden had any clue about Paul, he probably wouldn't have even thought about stepping foot near the restaurant's entrance. Paul had a notorious reputation for his blatant prejudice against black people. Being the manager of the joint for nearly a decade, he had never hired a single black worker, despite many qualified applicants knocking on his door. Jaden trembled with fear at Paul's venomous words. Mustering his courage, Jaden politely inquired if there were any odd jobs available. He even attempted to negotiate, expressing that he wouldn't mind working for just a meal. Enraged, Paul erupted. "Listen up, kid. I don't know what gave you the gall to walk in here, but you better skedaddle before I dial security." Jaden dropped to his knees, begging Paul, but the manager remained unmoved. "This establishment is for the elite, not for someone like you," he spat out. Paul abandoned the boy and hurried back to his desk, threatening to call security. Jaden stood there, stunned, the manager's words hitting him like a punch to the gut. Feeling deeply ashamed, he turned and left the restaurant quickly, head down. Outside, he found solace next to a parked car, slumping against it. Overwhelmed with humiliation, he buried his face in his knees, tears streaming down his cheeks. Never had he felt so degraded, especially for his race. Amidst his tears, he yearned for a better life, whispering through sobs, "Why does life have to be so unjust to me? Why doesn't anybody want me?" Jaden sobbed, his thoughts lingering on his dad, Harry. He was the only one who truly cared for him. Harry and his wife Julie had taken in Jaden when he was just 3. 8 years into their marriage and childless, they'd deliberated adoption, with Harry singling out Jaden. Their bond was immediate during his first orphanage visit. Harry initiated the legal process, and within a month, Jaden was legally theirs. Finally, having a child of their own brought them immense joy. Though not biologically theirs, they poured unconditional love and everything he desired into Jaden. Unfortunately, Julie conceived 2 years post-adoption, altering their family dynamic. She gave birth to a baby girl they named Lizard. Harry was brimming with indescribable joy. He now had 2 little ones to adore and look after. Yet, Julie's affection for Jaden soured over time. She began purposefully making Jaden's life miserable, burdening him with endless household chores. By the age of 5, Jaden found himself scrubbing dishes, tackling laundry, and attempting simple cooking tasks. Jaden was bewildered by his mother's sudden shift in attitude toward him, wondering if he had somehow triggered her strange behavior. Despite this, he obediently followed every command, completing each task without a hint of complaint. Upon witnessing Jolly's mistreatment of Jaden, Harry attempted to intervene, but his warnings fell on deaf ears. Jolly would engage in heated arguments with Harry whenever he defended Jaden. She frequently emphasized that Lizard was her only biological child, while they had adopted Jaden out of necessity. Despite Harry's efforts to mend the relationship between Jolly and Jaden, things only seemed to worsen. Harry felt powerless to change the situation. His health was on a downward spiral, worsened by the turmoil at home. Diagnosed with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, he relied on medication to ease his symptoms. Yet, despite the treatments, Harry's condition continued to decline. Upon his twin brother Thomas's advice, he made the tough decision to step away from work, prioritizing his well-being. Their upbringing had been tough since their father's passing, but their brotherly bond remained unbreakable. Concerned for Harry's welfare, Thomas, who was financially secure, began providing him with a weekly allowance. He couldn't bear to see his twin brother struggling. Aware of the challenges at Harry household, Thomas couldn't comprehend Jolly's cruelty towards Jaden, whom he adored. Every visit, he showered Jaden and Lizard with gifts and affection, cherishing their time together. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, Harry's health deteriorated further. Despite battling with his heart condition, Harry refused to give in, determined to stay strong for his family. Tragically, he ultimately lost the fight to death's icy grip following a severe heart failure. With Harry gone, Jaden found himself entirely at Jolly's mercy. Watching his world crumble before his eyes, Jaden mourned the loss of the only person who had ever truly loved and cared for him, the one who had protected him from Jolly's wrath. While Jolly outwardly mourned Harry passing, she seemed to transfer her grief onto Jaden, intensifying his suffering and leaving him with no respite. At nearly 10 years old, Jaden mourned the loss of his father figure and endured his own plight. Despite his prayers for Jolly to soften her heart towards him as she once did, it seemed his pleas went unanswered. After enduring 8 months of relentless mistreatment, Jaden reached his breaking point, unable to bear it any longer. He couldn't stand another day in that house. It was like living in hell. He'd put up with Jolly's abuse all along for his late dad's sake. Harry was the only reason he silently endured it all. He used to find solace knowing there was still someone who cared for him, who'd stand by him. But with Harry gone, there was nothing left to cling to, no reason to stay. Jaden was resolute. He was leaving, no turning back. He had nowhere to go, no one to turn to, but anything was better than enduring more of his so-called mother's cruelty. So, on a stormy night, Jaden packed what little he had, slipped into the darkness, and vanished without a backward glance. Jolly breathed a sigh of relief when she discovered Jaden's disappearance. To her, it was good riddance to bad rubbish. Finally, she had the house all to herself and her daughter. It goes without saying that Jolly didn't lift a finger to search for the missing Jaden. In her heart, Jaden had actually done her a favor by disappearing. Jaden didn't know what the future held for him on the streets, but he was ready to face whatever came his way. He believed he was old enough to fend for himself and that things would eventually fall into place. In the initial days, Jaden wandered the streets, finding shelter wherever nightfall caught him. Eventually, he stumbled upon an abandoned building in a desolate part of the city, which became his makeshift home. As his meager food supply dwindled, Jaden started brainstorming ways to survive. Life on the streets was undeniably harsh for Jaden. He wandered from door to door, from office to office, seeking any odd jobs he could find in exchange for a meager wage. Sometimes Aiden would even settle for a warm meal instead of cash payment for tasks like taking out the trash, mowing lawns, washing dishes, and the like. But when work was scarce, he had no choice but to resort to begging for charity. All he cared about was having enough food to survive each day. For 2 long years, Aiden survived on the streets, living hand to mouth. One might have hoped for a change in his fortune, but it never came. In fact, things only grew worse with each passing day. Aiden would sit beneath the scorching sun, his tin can extended before him along busy streets, softly pleading with passers-by for any small kindness. Some days he hit the jackpot, scraping enough for a meal or two. Other times, Jaden returned to his makeshift shelter empty-handed, stomach growling through the night. And today was one of those days. He'd wandered the streets, hunger gnawing at him, his energy waning from days of sparse meals. Desperate, he ventured into a new neighborhood, hoping for alms or odd jobs. Then, amidst the bustling streets, he spotted Le Chateau restaurant, a beacon of grandeur. Perhaps he could score some leftovers or a day's work for a few bucks. Little did he expect the manager's scornful rejection. Lost in his misery, Jaden's gaze shifted to a flashy SUV gliding into the parking lot. His survival instincts kicked in right away, propelling him to leap up and seek charity. Brushing off the dust, he resolved to approach the driver again, determined to try his luck once more. Jaden refused to be discouraged by his encounter with Mr. Paul. He was hell-bent on extracting a little cash from the SUV's owner. With his stomach growling, he reasoned that anyone who could afford such a pricey car must have some spare change for a needy beggar. Jaden was already at the door when the car's owner gently pushed it open and stepped out. Jaden let out a loud scream as he recognized the man, a scream that echoed from the depths of his lungs. It was none other than Thomas, his father's identical twin. Thomas, realizing it was Jaden, was taken aback with astonishment. Without hesitation, Jaden rushed into Thomas's arms for a warm embrace. Thomas hugged him so tightly that Jaden worried he might crack his spine. If only Jaden had known the lengths to which Thomas went to find him. Thomas received news of Jaden's departure when he returned to the house 2 months later. He organized search parties, but they all ended in failure. He plastered thousands of missing person flyers across every street, yet no one reached out to say they'd found Jaden. Believing he'd lost Jaden forever, Thomas was crushed. He felt he'd let down his brother Harry by failing to protect his beloved son. An unexpected flood of joy washed over him as they reunited. Aiden wept tears of happiness as he embraced Thomas even tighter. Just minutes ago, he had felt utterly alone in the world. Now his uncle was by his side. Perhaps his luck was about to change. Thomas had countless questions, and Aiden was eager to answer them all. In a heartfelt conversation, Thomas listened intently as Jaden poured out the reasons behind his decision to run away and the hardships he endured living on the streets. Tears welled up in Thomas's eyes, empathizing with Jaden's struggles from such a young age. He couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt, realizing the stark contrast between Jaden's suffering and the comfort his own family enjoyed. Perhaps if he had searched a little harder, he could have prevented Jaden's ordeal. However, Thomas was snapped back to reality as Jaden recounted the humiliating experience he faced at Le Chateau restaurant, where he had hoped for a job or even a meal, but instead faced public humiliation from the manager. Thomas's face flushed with fury upon hearing the news. Slamming his car door shut, he grasped Jaden's hand tightly and strode into the restaurant, ready to confront the manager. Little did Jaden know, Thomas was the real boss of Le Chateau restaurant. He made weekly visits to oversee operations and handle financial matters. Although Paul was entrusted to manage the place in his absence, Thomas had been hearing troubling reports about his performance. He simply waited for the opportune moment to address these concerns, and today seemed like the perfect occasion. Paul's mistreatment of Jaden provided Thomas with the conclusive evidence he needed to address the mounting complaints. As Thomas entered the restaurant, all eyes turned towards him. A wave of shock swept over Paul's face when he saw Thomas walking hand in hand with the very same black boy he had ridiculed and belittled just 2 hours earlier. Thomas wasted no time in expressing his thoughts to Paul. "This diner welcomes everyone, no matter their background or skin color," Thomas declared firmly to Paul, who trembled visibly. "By treating my nephew like he's beneath you, you've violated the very essence of this establishment," Thomas's voice thundered. Paul dropped to his knees, begging Thomas for mercy, his mind spinning from the shock. Who would have guessed that the destitute black beggar was actually his boss's relative? Paul realized he was in deep trouble, but he continued to plead desperately for forgiveness. Thomas, however, was unmoved. He couldn't overlook Paul's cruelty in denying a hungry boy a meal. With the restaurant regularly having surplus food, there was no excuse for Paul's actions, only exposing his deep-seated prejudice. In that moment, Thomas promptly dismissed Paul and ordered him to leave the premises immediately. Helpless, Paul hoisted himself up from the ground and somberly exited the diner. Jaden was stunned, witnessing the unfolding drama. He couldn't decide which was more surprising, discovering his uncle owned the city's largest eatery, or witnessing the swift reversal of fortunes within a mere 3 hours. Gratitude welled up in Jaden as Thomas ordered him a meal, ensuring he had plenty to eat and drink. Watching Jaden eat, Thomas pondered his next move. There was no way Jaden was returning to the streets. Thomas toyed with the idea of officially adopting Jaden as his own son. He and his wife Pamela had struggled with infertility throughout their 6-year marriage. Adoption had been on the table before, but they hadn't pursued it. Now, with Jaden right in front of him, why endure the arduous process of searching for an adoptive child when he already had a son in sight? Thomas brought Jaden home and briefed his wife on the situation, expressing his desire to adopt him. Pamela, known for her compassionate nature, readily agreed to her husband's decision. She had witnessed his distress ever since Jaden went missing and embraced the idea of welcoming him into their family wholeheartedly. Jaden felt like his world had suddenly turned brighter. He experienced a level of love and care he never knew existed. Thomas and Pamela treated him as if he were their biological child, showering him with affection and attention. The family went on to live happily ever after. What insights did you gain from this compelling story? Feel free to share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you in the next video.